They called him a trespasser at the gates of his own mansion, but when the system spoke his name, the entire street, and the whole world watching, saw who really owned the night. The street was quiet, the kind of silence that only wealthy neighborhoods could afford. It was late, the hour when most windows were dark, when even the leaves seemed to hush under the weight of still air. At the far end of the cul-de-sac, iron gates rose tall and imposing, their black steel bars glinting beneath the pale wash of a street lamp. A figure approached, steady and unhurried. He wore no tailored suit, no polished shoes, just a gray tank top with faint letters across the chest. His name was Carter, and this was his home. But to the people waiting at the gate, he was just another man who didn't belong. A woman stood there, her white dress almost glowing under the light, fitted perfectly to her form, her chin tilted at an angle that spoke of possession. 3 guards flanked her, their uniforms crisp, their hands hovering near belts heavy with authority. One already had his hand on a pair of cuffs, the metallic ring glinting like a promise of humiliation. The woman's voice cracked the silence. "Step back. You don't live here." Each word came sharp, cold, bouncing against the iron bars as if the gate itself echoed her judgment. She smiled thinly, a smile without warmth, and gestured to the guards. "Detain him before he tries anything." Carter didn't move. He didn't protest, didn't even frown. His broad shoulders squared against the night air, his hands loosely clasped in front of him. The calm was not weakness. It was the same calm that had carried him through other nights like this, in other places where doors were closed, not by locks but by assumptions. One of the guards smirked, interpreting silence as defiance. Another laughed outright, shaking his head as though the sight of a man in a tank top before a mansion was comedy in itself. The third leaned forward, his voice low but laced with venom. "Guys like you don't walk through gates like these. Money doesn't get you here. You think it does, but it doesn't." The woman in white stepped closer, heels striking the pavement like a drumbeat of arrogance. She jabbed her finger toward Carter's chest. "This is private property. Cry, shout, do whatever you want, you're not getting through." Her tone rose. "Call backup. Now." Carter's eyes lifted for the first time, not rushing, not sharp, but steady. There was no anger in them, only a weight, the kind that measured and remembered. His silence wasn't emptiness. It was memory. He remembered being 23, standing outside an apartment building with papers in his hand, the landlord sneering as he refused to hand over the keys Carter had already paid for. He remembered being 30, standing in a valet line where the attendant tossed him the wrong set of keys, assuming he was hired help, not the owner of the car shining under the lights. Different years, different faces, but the same contempt. Now, standing at the gates of the home he had built, he saw the pattern repeating. The guards mistook his stillness for fear. The woman mistook his clothes for insignificance. And together, they mistook their voices for truth. A smirk curled across the guard's lips as he unclipped the cuffs fully. The metallic click broke the night. Another guard muttered under his breath, "Can't wait to watch him try and resist." The woman folded her arms, her laughter brittle. "This will be quick." Carter inhaled slowly, the breath even and controlled. He had learned long ago that shouting did not make people listen, that anger only fed those who craved it. No, silence was stronger. Silence let them reveal themselves. He let the moment stretch, let the woman's words hang too long in the air, heavy enough to expose their cruelty. His gaze never left hers, calm, unwavering. Behind the iron bars, the mansion loomed, its windows dark but watchful, as if waiting. The woman lifted her chin higher, mistaking quiet for surrender. She didn't know that the quiet was the storm gathering, patient and deliberate. And while the guards prepared to bind his wrists, Carter knew what they didn't: the night would not end the way they expected. The street did not stay empty for long. First it was a jogger slowing his pace, then a couple walking their dog, then a neighbor pulling his car to the curb, headlights spilling across the iron gates. Curiosity was magnetic, and whispers spread faster than the night air. A boy no older than 16 lifted his phone, thumb tapping the screen until a red dot glowed. The live stream had begun. At first there were only a handful of viewers, then dozens, and then the numbers climbed as fast as the tension at the gate. The woman in white caught sight of the phone and laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. "Good, let them see," she declared, pointing at Carter as if unveiling a criminal. "This neighborhood wasn't built for people like you." The words snapped through the air like a whip. Even the dog walker flinched, pulling his leash tighter. The guards chuckled, emboldened by her venom. One leaned closer to Carter, sneering, "You hear that? You don't fit here. Never did. Never will." Another guard jerked his chin toward the boy with the phone. "Stop recording or you'll spend the night in cuffs too." The boy's eyes widened, but his grip only tightened on the phone. His voice shook as he whispered to his unseen audience, "Are you all hearing this? They're threatening me just for filming." The live stream count ticked higher. Carter stood still, his silence heavier than their words, but the sting of humiliation hung thick in the air. To the crowd gathering, this was no longer just about a man at a gate. It was about who was allowed to stand on that street, who was allowed to claim dignity, who was allowed to exist without permission. The woman's heels clicked closer, her finger jabbing toward Carter's chest again. "Do you understand what kind of place this is? People like you don't buy houses like these. People like you clean them." The guards laughed louder, one shaking his head, muttering, "He really thinks he belongs." The live stream chat exploded, lines of text rolling across the screen, strangers miles away voicing shock and anger. "Can't believe she said that. This is straight profiling. Bro, don't stop recording." The boy's hand trembled, not from fear of the guards, but from the weight of knowing thousands were suddenly witnessing. The crowd at the gate thickened, neighbors stepping from their porches, eyes darting between Carter's calm frame and the white-dressed woman's fury. Some mouths hung open, others whispered too low to catch, but the disbelief was visible on every face. Carter did not answer her words. He let them echo, let the cruelty linger long enough for others to taste. His silence drew the line between her arrogance and his composure, and the contrast made every insult sharper. The woman mistook his stillness for surrender. She raised her voice higher, her tone shrill now, desperate to cement her authority before it slipped. "Don't just stand there," she snapped at the guards, "prove you can do your job. Remove him from these gates." The guards shifted uneasily, but their bravado did not falter yet. One clutched the cuffs tighter, muttering, "We'll handle him." The boy behind the phone whispered again, "They're about to cuff him. Are you seeing this?" The number of viewers surged. The story was no longer trapped at the gate. It was traveling across screens, into living rooms and bedrooms, each word immortalized beyond recall. And while the woman in white believed she was winning, the world beyond the cul-de-sac was beginning to see her for exactly what she was. The air shifted with a low mechanical hum, almost too soft to notice at first. A red light pulsed above the iron gate, steady and sharp against the night. The guards glanced back, puzzled, as the system scanned with its cold precision. The light blinked once, twice, then turned green. A chime followed, clear and deliberate, cutting through the woman's shrill orders. "Welcome home, Mr. Carter." The words rolled out smooth, confident, undeniable. The cul-de-sac froze. Gasps broke the silence like cracks in glass. The boy holding the phone nearly dropped it, his live stream capturing every syllable. "Did you hear that?" he whispered, voice trembling. It literally said "Welcome home." The crowd stirred, neighbors whispering, heads turning toward one another in disbelief. The mansion itself had spoken, and it had spoken his name. For a moment the night seemed to hang suspended. But the guards recovered quickly, clinging to the authority slipping from their hands. "Glitch," one muttered, forcing a laugh too loud to sound real. "Happens all the time with these systems. Just a technical error." Another guard nodded too eagerly, trying to mask the unease in his eyes. Don't let this fool you. Protocol doesn't lie. The woman in white snapped her head toward the keypad, her face flushed crimson. Her voice rose, jagged and desperate. No, this proves nothing. Anyone could fake that. He doesn't belong here. Look at him. Real owners don't walk up to mansions dressed like that. Her words cracked across the pavement, brittle but loud, trying to bury the sound of the system's greeting. She turned to the guards, her finger stabbing the air. Restrain him before he gets inside. Now. But the command didn't land the same way it had minutes before. The crowd had heard it too. The boys' live stream chat erupted, comments flooding the screen. It said his name. It said Mr. Carter. This is real. Bro owns the house. They're finished. The murmurs on the street swelled, uncertainty spreading like fire. Carter remained still, his broad frame unmoving, his silence filling the gap their noise left behind. His eyes lifted slightly, calm and unhurried, as though measuring the weight of the moment. Funny, he said quietly, almost to himself, how machines see truth clearer than humans. The line cut through the night sharper than any shout. The guards shifted, their bravado cracking at the edges. The woman in white laughed again, but it was a brittle laugh, high-pitched, tinged with fear. Don't believe it, she barked. This is a trick, a setup. He's staging this whole thing. But her words didn't carry the same force anymore. The system had spoken. The crowd had heard. The live stream was capturing everything. Carter's silence wrapped around them all, pressing down heavier than the woman's protests. The gate's green glow lingered like a verdict no one wanted to face, and the balance of power had just tilted, even if his accusers refused to admit it. The hum of the system grew louder, a mechanical stirring that pulled every eye toward the gate. The mounted cameras shifted, lenses rotating with a precise click until they locked not on Carter, but on the guards themselves. A second chime echoed, lower this time, deliberate, almost judicial. Unauthorized personnel detected. Access suspended. The words boomed from hidden speakers, cold and impartial. The tallest guard blinked hard, fumbling at his badge. A faint red light pulsed once, then dimmed completely. He tapped it against the reader beside the gate. Nothing. The younger guard pressed his earpiece, voice rising, dispatch, confirm. Static hissed back, relentless, filling the silence with its own verdict. Another guard slapped his radio, shaking it as if force could restore authority. Only dead air answered. The crowd shifted, whispers rippling like a tide. Did it just lock them out? Someone murmured. A neighbor gasped, eyes wide as she pointed. Their badges just died. The woman in white snapped her head toward the system, her face twisted with rage. No. This isn't real. It's a malfunction. Do you hear me? A glitch. She shouted louder, her voice trembling under the strain. Stop hesitating. Do your jobs. But hesitation was already spreading through the ranks. The guards stiffened, their bravado thinning. The SUV driver leaned out of his window, his voice carrying across the cul-de-sac. I've seen him here for years, jogging past, coming home late. That's his house. Don't you recognize him? A middle-aged neighbor stepped forward, clutching her phone high as she recorded. She spoke steady, her tone cutting through the woman's protests. I've lived across from this place for almost a decade. That's Mr. Carter. He's lived here longer than most of us. The guards looked between one another, eyes darting, the certainty in their posture draining with every word. The younger one tried to recover, his voice thin but defiant. The system's wrong. Protocol says verify ID. Until then, this man doesn't pass. But his words sounded hollow, swallowed by the reality that their tools, their badges, their radios had all turned against them. Unauthorized personnel detected, the system repeated, louder this time, as if pronouncing a sentence. The crowd stirred again, phones rising higher, comments from the live stream pouring in. Even the tech knows. They're locked out. The woman in white whirled toward Carter, desperate fury spilling into her tone. You're manipulating something. Hacking the system. This is all staged. But her words cracked, brittle with panic. Carter remained still, his silence pressing heavier than her shouts. He didn't need to argue. The mansion itself was speaking for him now, its lights pulsing faintly along the driveway, casting the guards in stark white like defendants on trial. The crowd's energy shifted. They weren't just watching anymore. They were witnessing a reversal, a tilt of power so sharp it left the guards stranded. The tools they trusted had betrayed them, and the man they tried to erase stood untouched, steady, his name echoing from the very walls they swore to protect. The woman's scream cut the night again, but it no longer commanded. It only revealed her desperation, her authority crumbling in front of neighbors, strangers, and the thousands watching live. The balance had shifted, and for the first time, the question was no longer whether Carter belonged here. It was whether they did. The crowd was no longer a handful of curious neighbors. It swelled with every passing minute, bodies pressing closer to the gate, phones raised high, their screens glowing like a sea of small torches. The boy's live stream ticked past 20,000 viewers, comments flying faster than he could read. Words like profiling, injustice, and shame scrolled across his screen, the digital voice of a world now watching. The woman in white stood rigid, her face flushed with fury. Her voice cut across the murmur like broken glass. He does not belong here. This is not his home. You're all being fooled. She jabbed her finger again at Carter, her tone rising to the edge of hysteria. Look at him. Look at what he's wearing. Owners don't walk up like this. He's lying. The guards straightened their shoulders, clinging to authority slipping away like sand. One spoke, louder than before, as if volume alone could restore command. Until he shows proper ID, this is trespassing. That's the law. Another added quickly, protocol is clear. We're not moving until verification. But their words carried less weight now, bouncing uselessly against the tension of the street. Carter remained silent, his frame unmoving, his eyes steady, his breath measured. That silence was no longer weakness. It was gravity. The more he withheld his voice, the more the crowd found theirs. A woman in a red blouse pushed forward from the mass, her phone clutched in one hand, her face lit with resolve. Her voice rang out sharp, cutting through the noise. You're not just denying his home. You're denying his existence. The words cracked the night wide open. A hush fell, only to be broken by a murmur that grew into a chant. Discrimination. Discrimination. The word rolled across the crowd like a wave, picked up by one, then another, until it became a chorus that rattled the guards more than the alarms had. The boys' live stream captured every syllable, comments exploding. They said it. They called it out. This is bigger than one man at a gate. Phones lifted higher, angles shifting, each recording not just Carter's stillness, but the collective voice rising in his defense. The woman in white's bravado faltered. She spun toward the neighbor in red, shouting, "You don't know what you're talking about. Stay out of this." But the neighbor didn't flinch. She raised her voice louder, steady and unshakable. "I know exactly who I'm talking about. I've seen him here. I've watched him build this life. And you will not erase him." The guards hesitated, caught between the woman's orders and the crowd's roar. One adjusted his cuffs nervously, his jaw tight but his hands unsteady. Another pressed his badge against the reader again, desperate for a response that never came. Static hissed from their radios like a reminder of their powerlessness. Carter's silence grew heavier, his composure radiating through the chaos. He hadn't spoken, yet the crowd spoke for him, louder with each passing second. For the first time, the authority at the gate no longer belonged to the uniforms. It belonged to the witnesses, to the strangers holding phones, to the voices declaring what they were seeing. And in that moment, the street itself shifted from a place of accusation into a courtroom. The guards were no longer protectors. They were defendants. The woman in white was no longer a figure of authority. She was the one on trial. And Carter, still silent, stood at the center, not pleading his case, but allowing the world to render judgment for him. The chants from the crowd had barely died down when the guards made their move. Frustration twisted into aggression, and the younger one lunged forward, snapping the cuffs open with a metallic click that sliced through the night. His partner followed, crowding Carter on the other side, their shoulders squared, jaws tight, as if sheer force could salvage the authority slipping away. The woman in white clapped her hands sharply, her voice shrill and triumphant. Finally. Restrain him. Show them who's in charge. The steel cuffs met Carter's wrist with a sharp ring, cold against his skin. Gasps tore through the crowd, phones jolting as live streams caught every frame. The guard yanked hard, trying to lock the mechanism. Then it happened. 3 piercing tones pulsed from the mansion, a sound that froze the air. Lights embedded in the driveway burst to life, flooding the gate in stark white beams. Warning. Use of force against the property owner will trigger escalation protocol. The voice was smooth, mechanical, unyielding. The guards jerked back instinctively, eyes wide. The cuff in the younger guard's hand jammed, the locking pin refusing to close. He twisted it, forced it, but the steel refused to obey. It clattered uselessly, refusing to become a shackle. The crowd erupted, gasps mixing with shouts. Did you hear that? It called him the property owner. Even the machines know. Phones zoomed in, faces caught in raw disbelief. The woman in white shouted over the noise, her words breaking with panic. No. This is staged. He hacked it. It's all a trick. But her voice cracked under the sirens that wailed next, low and deliberate, echoing down the cul-de-sac like a siren of judgment. Carter didn't flinch. His voice cut through the chaos, calm, resonant, steady. Nia, activate Westgate Protocol. The command was quiet, but it carried like a strike of thunder. A voice answered instantly from the speakers, crisp and unwavering. Understood. System override engaged. At once, the guards' badges lit red, pulsing bright like warnings strapped to their chests. Then, one by one, they flickered, dimmed, and died. Access revoked. The tallest guard slapped at his earpiece. Static. The younger guard pressed his badge desperately against the reader. A harsh buzz screamed back, the screen flashing unauthorized. The third tugged at his radio, his face pale as the device clicked off completely. Nothing. Just silence. The crowd gasped again, louder now, phones lifted high as they recorded the spectacle. One voice shouted from the back, he just shut them down. They're done. The live stream counter spiked, comments pouring in, disbelief turning into exhilaration. Fired in real time. This is insane. The guards stumbled, faces drained of color, their authority disintegrating in their own hands. The woman in white's defiance cracked into desperation. You can't do this, she shrieked. You don't have that kind of power. Carter's gaze found her at last, calm and cold. I don't bluff with what's mine. The words landed like a verdict. The system followed with its own sentence. Security clearance terminated. Awaiting owner authorization for personnel removal. Phones captured every syllable. The crowd roared, some clapping, some shouting, others laughing in disbelief. They just lost their jobs. On the spot. The guards staggered, trembling hands gripping dead badges, radios silent, their tools of control turned to ash. The cuffs still dangled uselessly from one hand, refusing to bind. Carter stood motionless in the flood of light, his silence louder than the alarms, his authority no longer questioned. For years, he had been told he didn't belong, but tonight the house itself answered. And in front of the crowd, in front of thousands watching live, the power they thought they owned collapsed entirely, stripped away by the very system they trusted. The night belonged to Carter now, and the verdict was undeniable. The iron gates groaned, their hinges releasing with a slow, deliberate weight, as though the house itself had decided the time for judgment had arrived. Golden light spilled from the mansion beyond, washing over Carter's frame, bathing the cul-de-sac in a glow that felt almost ceremonial. The crowd hushed, phones raised high, live stream counters exploding past 100,000 viewers, each one watching the balance of power collapse in real time. The guards stood frozen, badges dead, radios silent, their authority erased. The woman in white stumbled backward, her breath shallow, her eyes darting toward the crowd as though a hidden escape might still exist. But there was none. She had screamed too loudly, stood too boldly, and now every lens was aimed at her retreat. Carter finally broke his silence, his voice low, steady, but carrying with the weight of a verdict. You mistook my silence for weakness. Tonight, silence became your verdict. The words sliced through the air, heavier than alarms, sharper than steel. The crowd erupted, cheers rising like a tide, chants echoing his name. The woman's lips trembled as she whispered, "This can't be real." But the phones captured her collapse, her fear immortalized alongside her cruelty. Carter lifted his phone, tapped once, his tone calm as stone. "Nia, log the incident. Terminate Westgate security detail. Effective immediately." The system's voice answered without hesitation. Credentials revoked. Employment records flagged. Processing now. The guards flinched as their badges buzzed one final time, then went black, the screens fading to nothing. One guard tried his earpiece again, his lips parted in a whisper. Dead. Another fumbled for his phone, only to see it lock him out, access denied flashing cold across the glass. The tallest lowered his head, muttering, "We didn't know." His words fell flat, swallowed by the roar of the crowd. The red-bloused neighbor stepped forward, her voice fierce, trembling with emotion. "You laid hands on him. You tried to erase him. And every second of it is recorded." She held her phone higher, her arm steady, as if raising a torch. "Justice isn't loud. It's final." The SUV driver's voice rose next, sharp and unflinching. "You profiled the man who owns your jobs, your paychecks, your future, and you did it in front of the world." The crowd thundered, applause cracking through the night, cheers rattling the gates. The guards' faces sagged under the weight of shame, their eyes cast down, their hands empty. The woman in white tried to slip backward, pushing into the crowd, but the phones followed her, every step tracked, her downfall streamed for all to see. She turned her face away, but there was no hiding. Carter did not chase her. He did not need to. The night had already delivered her sentence. He turned instead toward the open gates, the mansion lights glowing in recognition. Owner profile confirmed. "Welcome home, Mr. Carter." The words rang out again, sealing the truth. The crowd erupted once more, chanting his name, clapping until their hands stung. The boy with the live stream wiped his eyes, his voice trembling with awe. "You're all seeing this. He's the owner." They tried to erase him, but the house, the system, the truth, it all stood with him. Carter paused at the threshold, the glow painting his frame in gold. He turned once more, his eyes scanning the faces, not with anger, but with quiet resolve. He spoke a final line, each syllable deliberate. "I don't need to shout. My life speaks for itself. Tonight, the truth denied you." The gates closed slowly behind him, their heavy clang landing like the strike of a gavel. The mansion stood tall, its windows lit, its walls declaring the verdict no words could erase. The crowd remained outside, buzzing, replaying, chanting, knowing they had not simply watched a confrontation. They had witnessed a reckoning. And as the gates locked once more, the message lingered in the night air: true power never has to prove itself. If you enjoyed this story, let us know in the comments. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more inspiring stories.